Thank you very much. Good evening, everyone, and thank you as always for joining. I would like to try and finish. Our sugya is unfinishable. I mean, it's an enormous sugya, but do our best at least to finish some further comments on the sugya, so that we can start Sunday on the next small sugya at the bottom of the Amud. So I really just would like to make a few more sort of general conceptual points, sort of general conceptual ideas around the sugya, and then just run through a couple of sort of details and tosis that I wanted to pick up on. The Ramban, as I mentioned last week, really asks why, according to Rabbi Yehuda, is one not chayev for a third melacha, the melacha of Netilas Neshama. And the other Rishonim add that this question is a problem. The question is a profound question, an important question, because Rabbi Yehuda is mechayev, holds that a davar she'einu miskavin one is chayev for, and he also holds that you're chayev for malacha she'en tzrich l'gufa. So in that case, we have a toxic combination, in which would seem to say one should be chayev for netilas neshama. It's true that killing the animal, the Chilazon, may be a davar she'einu miskavin, it may be lo nichale, it may be a malacha she'en tzrich l'gufa, but according to Rabbi Yehuda, you're chayev for all of these. Because davar she'einu miskavin, Rabbi Shimon says, go adam mitasa, you can drag a sofa along the ground, davar she'einu miskavin is potter. Rabbi Yehuda holds also, and according to Ramban, chayev. So if Rabbi Yehuda holds you're chayev, in that case, why should you be exempt to Netilas Neshama? Now, in essence, Tosis really answers this question. And Tosis says the answer is because it's Mekalkel. The Ramban doesn't accept the answer. And I think we mentioned at the end of last week that the Ramban seems to look at Tosis seems to look at the overall picture and says it's a Mekalkel. The Ramban says it's true, it's Mekalkel in terms of the dye. On the other hand, it's a tikkun also because it's easier to deal with a dead Chilazon and process it rather than a live Chilazon, and therefore there's something positive in the Netilas Neshama that should be enough to make it a tikkun, not a kilkul. That's the Ramban's question. In brief, why is Netilas Neshama not chayev? Because of, true, it's damaging somewhat, nonetheless, it's good also. True, it's einem miskavin. Rabbi Yehuda holds davar she'einu miskavin chayev. True, it's malacha she'en tzrich l'gufa, but Rabbi Yehuda holds malacha she'en tzrich l'gufa. So asks the Ramban. And the Ramban answers that according to the Ramban answers that even Rabbi Yehuda holds your chayev for davar she'einu miskavin, he would agree that where you don't wish the outcome, where there's a negative intention, you would be exempt, you would be potter. So it seems to be the conclusion from the words of the Rishonim. And this needs a little bit of understanding. Why, if davar she'einu miskavin is chayev, why should a wish not to have the outcome be enough to exempt you? And as we discussed in Rashi, apathy versus negativity. Tosa says that Rabbi Shimon, who says that a psik ratio of the lo nichale is potter, doesn't mean lo nichale that you're negative, you don't want it. Even apathy is enough. Disinterest is enough. Rashi Rashi here says apathy is not enough. You need active negativity. You need to be opposed to the outcome. This is going in Rabbi Shimon. In Tosas explains that the reason why Rabbi Shimon holds for psik ratio your potter even when you're apathetic is because it's a malacha she'en tzrich l'gufa. Rashi, for whatever reason, here holds apathy isn't enough. You need to be against it, which wrenches the action away from it being inevitably intertwined, and therefore it ceases to be equivalent of psik ratio. Now, this is a nice answer in Rabbi Shimon, who holds davar she'einu miskavin is potter. Davar she'einu miskavin is exempt. If it's a psik ratio, it's too intertwined to argue that it's an unintended side consequence. If you don't want the result, then it goes back to being unintended. But according to Rabbi Yehuda, who holds that davar she'einu miskavin is chayev, why should negativity, why should a diswant, a non-want of the outcome exempt you from the melacha? So this is what we need to understand in our Ramban, and this is what I wanted to focus on. And the reason I wanted to discuss this is because I think it brings out an important point. And the important point is that what actually is the argument between Rabbi Shimon and Rabbi Yehuda about whether Dover She'einu Miskavin is potter or not. Now, the Ramban assumes that according to Rabbi Yehuda, Dover She'einu Miskavin is not only osa, i.e. forbidden drabanon, but it is even chayev. This is another discussion that we're not going to go into, but just for your general knowledge, you should be aware that when we have a machlokes Rabbi Shimon and Rabbi Yehuda, Rabbi Shimon says Dover She'einu Miskavin is mutter. Rabbi Yehuda certainly says osa. Is it just otter but potter aval osa? Are you rabbinically forbidden, or is it even chayev? And the Ramban here explicitly tells us that Dover She'einu Miskavin is chayev. Why is Dover She'einu Miskavin chayev? Surely, even if Rabbi Yehuda is of the view that in Kol HaTorah Kula Dover She'einu Miskavin is potter, surely when it comes to Shabbos, we need meleches masheves. Even if according to Rabbi Yehuda in Kol HaTorah Kula Dover She'einu Miskavin is chayev, when it comes to Shabbos, surely we need intentionality. We need a targeted melacha. We need meleches masheves. How can Rabbi Yehuda hold you're chayev for Dover She'einu Miskavin? And the answer to this question is we need to understand why Rabbi Yehuda disagrees about Dover She'einu Miskavin. And there's two ways to explain it. Either Rabbi Yehuda holds kavanah doesn't matter, in which case we indeed have a question: how can you be chayev on Shabbos? Surely you need melachot mashavos. Alternatively, Rabbi Yehuda holds that Dover She'einu Miskavin is not a true unintended side consequence, because you are aware that this will be a possible result of your action. Misaseh is a complete unawareness of what's happening. I think I'm picking up something, and really I'm plucking something that's growing from the ground. But Dover She'einu Miskavin, I'm pulling along the couch, the sofa, and it creates a furrow. It's true it's not a psik ratio, it's not an inevitable result, but nonetheless I'm aware it's a possible result. So can I feign non-kavanah in such a situation? Well, it depends what we mean by kavanah. And this is something that I mentioned in answer to questioning a couple of weeks back, that intentionality means lots of different things. There's machshava, there's kavanah, there's das, and so on and so forth. Rabbi Yehuda, perhaps the reason why Rabbi Yehuda says you're chayev for Dover She'einu Miskavin is because he doesn't really hold there's such a thing as Dover She'einu Miskavin. If it's truly ein mitkavin, if there's indeed no intentionality, complete unawareness of the result, then fine. But Rabbi Yehuda argues that what Rabbi Shimon calls a Dover She'einu Miskavin is not a true unintended side consequence, because I'm aware that when I drag the bed along, it may create a fire in the ground, and I can't argue that I'm completely unaware of that consequence. In brief, two ways to understand Rabbi Yehuda. Either Rabbi Yehuda says you don't need kavanah, or Rabbi Yehuda says you need kavanah, but this is sufficient kavanah. The possibility of something occurring is sufficient kavanah. If the latter is the model of Rabbi Yehuda, in other words, he doesn't say, in truth, he doesn't hold Dover She'einu Miskavin is exempt. He is chayev. He says Dover She'einu Miskavin is not ein miskavin. What you're calling Dover She'einu Miskavin is really, there is some degree of intentionality. I know this result is a possibility. If that is shut in Rabbi Yehuda, then we can understand why they would say that you're a chayev. We asked, how can Rabbi Yehuda hold you're a chayev with Dover She'einu Miskavin? Surely I need melachot masheves, intentionality when doing melachos. The answer to Rabbi Yehuda holds there is intentionality. I'm aware that when I'm putting this may create a furrow. I'm not definite. It's not my purpose in doing it. My purpose in doing it is pulling along the sofa. But I can't argue that there's no intentionality in other results. I'm aware that what I'm doing may cause the other outcome too. It may indeed create a furrow.
So at this stage, can we bring in the fact that it's nichale or non-nichale, like we do with psik ratio, or is that completely on a different plane, sort of thing?
So if nichale means disinterest in the result, then Rabbi Yehuda would argue it's not relevant over here. Nichale, according to Tosfos, disinterest means melacha shein tzricha l'gufa, meaning I know the result is happening. That's in the case of psik ratio, it will inevitably happen, but I'm not doing it for the other sort of intentionality, my goal. Again, let's remember that the problem over here is intentionality means lots of things. Melacha shein tzricha l'gufa is I'm aware I'm doing the melacha. I may even be intending to do the melacha, but my purpose in the melacha is something else. So lo nichale, according to Tosfos, is a purposelessness to the melacha. I don't want the result. I have no interest in the furrow being created. That's my purpose. But in terms of intentionality, in the sense of awareness that this is what I'm doing, I'm aware that this is what I'm doing, argues Rabbi Yehuda. I'm aware that as I drag the bench, it may create a furrow. So I can't claim complete detachment from the furrow that's being created. Rabbi Shimon says no. Rabbi Shimon says if it's a definite result, then it's intertwined in what I'm doing. I can't claim I'm not creating the furrow. But if it's not a definite result, it's a possibility. I can say, look, I'm not, the possibility can or cannot occur. I have no idea if it will happen or not. I'm pulling along my bed. I'm schlepping the sofa. If it creates a furrow, big deal. If it doesn't, big deal. It's completely immune and removed from what I'm doing. Rabbi Yehuda argues with that concept. Rabbi Yehuda says, if I'm aware it's a possibility, I can't claim that this is a kavanah-less action. It's an action that has the degree of kavanah to it. And therefore, this would cross the threshold of melachos mashaves. This would be an intentional action, and therefore, even if I'm indifferent to the purpose, it's a purposeless action. That's the debate around melachot in tzricha l'gufa. And Rabbi Yehuda holds you don't need purposefulness in your melachot. Melachot in tzricha l'gufa is chayav. So this is.
So they have different standards in melachet machshevet. Rabbi Yehuda requires a lower standard in melachet machshevet to Rabbi Shimon.
Spot on. Thank you. You said it far clearer than I did. Yes, they're debating over the degree of kavanah that you need for melachet machshevet. Yes. That's the suggestion. It's not that Rabbi Yehuda holds you need no kavanah, it's that Rabbi Yehuda holds there's sufficient kavanah over here. Even in what Rabbi Shimon labels a davar she'eino miskavin, Rabbi Yehuda argues is not davar she'eino miskavin, there's a degree of kavanah present. There are different standards of kavanah necessary. Now, if that's the case, then I think we can understand the Ramban's theory that Rabbi Yehuda would agree if you actively don't want the result, that would be enough. In other words, if I am neutral and purposeless in my action, Rabbi Yehuda would say, look, I'm aware that the couch may create a furrow, and I can't therefore argue that this isn't intertwined in my action. It's true I'm engaged in moving furniture, but the result is a possible result that it will create a furrow. I am conscious that this is part and inherent in my action. If I don't want the furrow, and were it possible, I wouldn't do the furrow, and it's a negative side effect of the action I'm doing, maybe there Rabbi Yehuda would agree that this falls below even his lower threshold of kavanah and melachos mashaves, and therefore even he would agree it's exempt. So in brief, we asked a question on the Ramban. The Ramban says that Rabbi Yehuda would agree with davar she'eino miskavin, where you don't want the result, you're exempt. And we said, what's that mean? Rabbi Yehuda holds you don't need kavanah. The answer is we've misunderstood it. Even Rabbi Yehuda holds you need kavanah. Rabbi Yehuda just has, in Adam's words, a lower threshold of kavanah. But even Rabbi Yehuda would agree that you need some intentionality. If you don't want the result and you're doing your best to avoid the result, even Rabbi Yehuda would agree that that falls below the threshold of kavanah, and that even Rabbi Yehuda would agree that this ceases to be melachos mashaves. So this is another important.
Oh, we had the idea that I thought, but in respect of the Chilazon, I thought we said everybody agrees. Mekalkel b'chaburah is chayav.
Mekalkel b'chaburah is yet another concept. Mekalkel b'chaburah is whether the concept of melachos mashaves makes sense. So that's the issue that Tosfos addresses, and whether that includes melachos into the gufa or not, and so on. But davar she'eino miskavin is a general rule in Kol HaTorah, and in addition, it's a Shabbos concept to do with melachos mashaves. So we're looking at the general rule of davar she'eino miskavin. We're then looking at it in the Shabbos context, aside from melachos she'ein tzricha l'gufa. And one minute. I misunderstood. Maybe you're right, Paul. Sorry. Let me backpedal and just think about your question again. You are asking that if there's no concept of melachos mashaves, why should the Shabbos rule of davar she'eino miskavin apply over here? I have no intentionality whatsoever. Again, sorry, davar she'eino miskavin is a principle in Shabbos and a principle in Kol HaTorah. Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Shimon argue in the whole Torah. I was simply using melachos mashaves as a crowbar to point out that Pshat and Rabbi Yehuda may be that he agrees you need kavanah, he just holds this is sufficient kavanah. But they argue both in the whole Torah and they argue in Shabbos. That means to say that Rabbi Yehuda in the whole Torah says you are chayav for davar she'eino miskavin, and Rabbi Shimon says you are exempt. Why does he say you're chayav for davar she'eino miskavin? Why does Rabbi Yehuda say you're chayav for davar she'eino miskavin? We are suggesting not because he thinks that kavanah doesn't matter, but because he thinks that you have sufficient kavanah. But Rabbi Yehuda would agree that where you have negative, where you don't want the result, even he would agree that falls below the threshold of kavanah. Is that making sense?
Well, I'm trying to relate that to mekalkel, which is in a sense negative. You know, you're taking a negative.
True, but remember the maths of Tosfos. Tosfos says that Dover Shenim Miskavin would apply with mekalkel. Tosfos says it can't be misasek because misasek is melachot masheves. Melachot masheves doesn't apply by mekalkel. Therefore, the explanation of the Gemara must be Dover Shenim Miskavin. So we're going with that reading of the Gemara. Dover Shenim Miskavin applies to chaburah, even though melachot masheves doesn't. So good. So now we get back to the classic machlokas Rabbi Shimon and Rabbi Yehuda, whether Dover Shenim Miskavin is chayav or potter. The Ramban now says that according to Rabbi Yehuda, that Dover Shenim Miskavin is chayav. Nonetheless, he would agree if I actively don't want the result, you're potter. A big kritish of the Ramban. Why should you be potter if you don't need kavanah? Answer: even the Ramban agrees that even Rabbi Yehuda agrees that you need a degree of kavanah. Okay, so that's that. This is an important principle. Let me just make Paul's point crystal clear because this is we're in a complicated sugya over here. We have a number of principles. Melachos masheves. Melachos masheves is a generic term which means lots of different things. It certainly, according to Tosfos, includes the concept of mekalkel, and Tosfos also argues it includes the concept of misasek. In other words, even though in the whole Torah you are exempt from misasek, in Shabbos there's an additional exemption of misasek because it's not melachos masheves. What's the difference between the parameters of the two? Interesting question. We're not going to go into it. That's the sugya on the top of Ayin Beis and Beis. Please God, we will learn it as a chaburah at the right time. But that's the sugya of misasek. What about melacha shein tzricha l'gufa? Tosfos says melacha shein tzricha l'gufa is not a melachos masheves thing. And we suggested that Rashi would argue, and we suggested that was linked to how you define melacha shein tzricha l'gufa. If melacha shein tzricha l'gufa is about any positive, excluding any negative purpose, for example, wanting to keep an animal away from me, that's why I trap it, or whether it's dumya to mishkan. So is melacha shein tzricha l'gufa a part of the family of melachos masheves dinim? Seems to be a machlokas Rashi Tosfos, that's what we suggested. What about Dover Shenim Miskavin? Well, Dover Shenim Miskavin, we're on safe territory. Dover Shenim Miskavin is a machlokas in the whole Torah. It's not just a unique Shabbos halacha. It applies even to sharpness. In which case, Dover Shenim Miskavin we know is not a melachos masheves type thing, and therefore Tosfos is correct when he says, even though they can't be arguing about misasek because that's a melachos masheves halacha, they can be arguing about Dover Shenim Miskavin because that is a did in kol Torah kula. That's the pshat in Dover Shenim Miskavin. We are now asking a question, which is the view of Rabbi Yehuda that you're chayav for Dover Shenim Miskavin because he holds you need no kavanah, or is the view of Rabbi Yehuda that he holds that a lower threshold of kavanah is sufficient? That's the two models. I can prove the second model because if Rabbi Yehuda holds you need no kavanah, what would be about melachos masheves? Shabbos surely does need melachos masheves. So even if in the whole Torah he holds no kavanah is enough, how can he hold in Shabbos that no kavanah is enough? Answer must be that he holds there is some kavanah with Dover Shenim Miskavin. It's just he's happy with the lower threshold of kavanah. If that's the case, then we can understand why Rabbi Yehuda would agree that Dover Shenim Miskavin, where I actively have an antipathy, a negative wish, I don't want the result to happen, even Rabbi Yehuda would agree that that doesn't cross the threshold of kavanah. That's the suggestion that we're saying. Let me just use the last few minutes available to make a few comments on some Tosfos, and then we will finish this sugya. Excuse me. Tosfos. Let me have a Tosfos Divrei HaMaskal HaTsad Chilazon. We'll start with. There are just a couple of comments I wanted to make on that. Tosfos says that HaTsad Chilazon. He says if it's talking about Potzer Chai, I understand it. Why it says HaTsad Chilazon? Because you normally one injures it as soon as one squeezes it, as soon as one traps it. Then he says, why are you not chayav for netilas? And then the discussion is netilas neshama as per the Gemara. Then he asks, why are you not chayav for removing it from the sea? Surely the removal from the sea is a netilas neshama of sorts, as per the Gemara of Hashole dog min hayom. So he says Tosfos. Answers Tosfos, the reason you are hotter with the Chilazon is because it is metharchis, it shakes itself around, and that brings its death near. So just to summarize the pertinent details of Tosfos that I want to focus on, Tosfos suggests that quotes a Gemara, that says removing a fish from the sea, you're chayav, because in so doing, you are causing the death of the fish. It's true the fish won't die straight away, the fish will die after half an hour, but the fish will eventually die as a result of my action, and therefore I am chayav. Tosfos says, why therefore would I not be chayav with the Chilazon for removing it from the sea? Answers Tosfos, because the Chilazon brings its own death nearer by flapping around, which causes it to dry out and die faster. Why should that exempt me? So the longus of Tosfos seems to be because I'm not the sole performer of the melacha. If I want to be chayav for the melacha, I need to be able to say, I have caused the death of the Chilazon by removing it from the water. But the Chilazon partnered me in causing its own death by flapping around, which speeds up its death, and therefore I am exempt. So says, this is the maths of Tosfos. Now, I don't understand the logic of Tosfos at all, for two reasons. The first reason is, the Chilazon is not an active agent. The Chilazon is an animal. By removing it from the water, I cause its death. How do I cause its death? Somewhat by, I don't know, depriving it of water or depriving it of the ability to breathe or whatever it is that happens through removing it from the water. In addition, because the natural reaction of the Chilazon is that it flaps around and therefore it dries itself up. It dries itself faster. That's all part of the chain of events that I set into motion by removing the Chilazon from the water. It is true that were a person to be an active agent, were this to be, let's say, a human, I could argue I am not the sole cause of the result, because the person moving around has also participated in the melacha. Let me give you an example. If I carry an object from Rosh Hashanah to Rosh Hashanah, I am potter. If two people carry the object, then they may both be potter. Why? Because each one has facilitated and assisted the other one. Neither of them is the sole proprietor, the sole cause of the result. Similarly, if I carry a living person out from Rosh Hashanah to Rosh Hashanah, I may be exempt, because the person being carried isn't a passive object. They actively facilitate the silence carrying. This is known as chai noses atzmo. A living person carries themselves and participates in the carrying. They're not the sole performer of the melacha. So this makes sense with a human being who is a partner in causing the result. A Chilazon is an animal of low intelligence. It's a snail or a fish or something of the sort. The Chilazon, by removing it from the water, I can't argue, as Tosfos does, that the Chilazon causes its own death, because I am the cause of the Chilazon flapping around and being mefarches and bringing its own death near, because this is all part of the chain reaction, the inevitable result of removing a Chilazon from water. So this is the first thing I don't understand in Tosfos. The second thing I don't understand in Tosfos is that the whole logic of Tosfos, that the Chilazon bringing its death nearer means that I'm exempt, is difficult to understand. Because if someone steps in and causes a reaction to happen faster, does that mean I'm exempt from the melacha? Let me give you an example of another delayed melacha. Cooking. So whenever I put food on the flame, the cooking result, the food crossing the threshold from raw to cooked, doesn't take place instantly. It takes a little bit of time. Let's say it's a large object, a potato, and maybe it takes a quarter of an hour. So I put the potato on the pot on the flame on Shabbos. I'm over bishul when the potato gets cooked a quarter of an hour later. Let's say someone turns the flame up, and therefore instead of it taking 15 minutes for the potato to get cooked, it takes 8 minutes for the potato to get cooked. Would I then be exempt from the melacha? It's not simple to say that I would be. I caused the potato to get cooked. Someone else simply sped up the process. So the second chiddush or interesting feature of Tosfos is he seems to be arguing that if the Chilazon speeds up the process of its own death by flapping around, that would exempt me from the melacha, because now the Chilazon is the cause of its death. I am not the cause of its death. And Tosfos seems to be saying a stronger argument even than shtaim shasa'u, two people doing a melacha together. He seems to argue that the second agent is the real cause of the Chilazon's death, which is the Chilazon flapping around. And by extension, therefore, perhaps Tosfos would say, if I turn the flame up, if the second person turns the flame up and causes it to cook after 7 minutes instead of after 15 minutes, the second person is the cause of the cooking, not the first person, and therefore the first person would be exempt. So that's one chiddush in Tosfos, that the person who speeds up, the agent that speeds up the reaction, is the one, it removes the culpability from me who caused the slower reaction. The second point in Tosfos, which I find more difficult, is that Chilazon is not an independent agent. If a person comes and turns on the gas, I understand. But Chilazon is not an independent agent. Chilazon didn't decide to flap around. It's all part of the chain reaction that I set into motion by removing the Chilazon from the water. So these are 2 points that I struggle a little bit to understand Tosfos, what Tosfos is saying over here. This is one comment I wanted to make. The final concluding comment I'll make on the sugya is something I think I mentioned right at the beginning of the sugya, I said I'll get back to Tosfos, and in the interest of time, we're not. We'll look at Tosfos on another occasion in more depth. But Tosfos' basic point is that there's two types of netilas neshama taking place over here. There's a netilas neshama from the perspective of the Chilazon, if the Chilazon gets killed, netilas neshama, and there's a netilas neshama from the perspective of the blood, because the blood of the Chilazon was part of a living organic creature and was alive, and by injuring the Chilazon and extracting its blood, the blood is detached from the Chilazon, and therefore the blood has gone from being part of a live body to being just inert, dead blood. And therefore, by removing the blood, I should be chayav from netilas neshama, not from the perspective of the Chilazon, which I've injured and will die, but from the perspective of the blood, which has been detached from being part of a living creature. So asks Tosfos, and Tosfos' answer is that the blood of the Chilazon is mifkad pocket, meaning to say that we don't view it halachically as mivla bola, as being absorbed and part of the living organic creature of the Chilazon, such that when I'm detaching it, I'm killing the blood, I'm removing the blood, I'm amputating the blood, and it's no longer a living organ of the body, but it's now inert dead blood. But rather, I view the blood as simply being stored in the Chilazon. I don't know if he means all the blood on the Chilazon, or at least the blood that's used for the dyeing process. And therefore, it's mifkad pocket, it's as it were in its own self-contained package within the Chilazon. And therefore, it was never part of the Chilazon, a living part of the Chilazon. It was simply something contained within the Chilazon. And therefore, if I remove it from the Chilazon, I'm not causing the death of the blood. The blood was never part of a living creature. It was simply contained by the living creature. So this is a general machlokas that we find in many cases in Shas. How do we conceptualize, for example, a liquid which is part of a body? Is the cholov, the milk, mifkad pocket? Is it simply contained within the cow? Is it mifkad bola? Is it absorbed and part of the cow? And in each case, we need to understand what the two models are based on. In the case of the Chilazon, I don't know enough about what a Chilazon is and how what the pertinent liquid that we're dealing with here, which is going to be used as a dye, is and how it relates to the body of the Chilazon, to know if Tosfos is a purely conceptual idea or if Tosfos is coming from something to do with the biology of the Chilazon. Or whether it's a lomdus and how we conceive of the relationship between the liquid and the Chilazon. But either way, just so we understand Pshat and Tosfos is saying that the blood is mifkad pocket, it's contained within the Chilazon, but it's not part of the Chilazon, and part of the living entity of the Chilazon, and therefore it's not netilas neshama by amputating the blood which was alive and is now dead, and therefore the only relevant netilas neshama to talk about is the change from the perspective of the Chilazon which was alive, but not a change from the perspective of the blood. This is the final comment I want to make in the sukkah in terms of pshat in Tosfos. Adam posted something over here. Books in 3.8 on when fish dies. Not sure if it helps us. I'm not sure it helps us either. Thank you for that comment. I don't. My question on Tosfos is sorry. Let me just say we're now moving back to the previous Tosfos about the Pirchos. I assume that's what you're going on, Tosfos of the Pirchos. Yeah, so going back to the previous Tosfos of Pirchos. My question is a logical question on Tosfos. Tosfos says the reason I'm not chayiv for causing the death of the Chilazon by removing it from the water is because the Chilazon brings its own death nearer by flapping around. Meaning to say that the Chilazon is the agent of its own death by bringing it nearer, not me. There's two chidushim in that. Number one, that when you're an agent of speeding up a melacha, that exempts the person who caused it. In other words, if I put something to cook and then you come along and turn the flame up and speed it up, I'm exempt because in 7 minutes time it got cooked and my action only caused it to get cooked in 15 minutes. First chiddush of Tosfos. Second chiddush of Tosfos is that we can view the Chilazon as causing its own demise. In other words, viewing the Chilazon as an agent, I don't understand that. I don't understand how the Chilazon can be viewed as an agent. The reason the Chilazon is flapping around is because so goes its biological mechanism caused by me removing the Chilazon from the water. So the nitty-gritty of the discussion I don't think helps us over here. You don't understand the concept of Tosfos. Excuse me, I seem to have developed a bit of a tickle in my throat, which is causing me to cough. So I think I'll stop here and wish everyone a good evening. I will be to send my Makomas for the next short sugya, which will start on Sunday. Adam, I think was shared via the group, or if not, can you share via the group the conclusion with term date? This is your last chance to let me know that you will be away, if you will be away near the end of August. But so far, apologies to the one person who has told me they will be away. But since there's only one person, I think we will get started near the end of August in order to get some learning in before Rosh Hashanah.
There's a couple of people who have posted to me they're away.
Yeah. Adam, so we'll take the discussion off group and we'll have a look at numbers. Okay. I wish everyone a good evening.
I hope to have
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.